A lot of filmmakers can make a movie that is furious at the rich. A lot of filmmakers can make a movie that is funny, chaotic, sexy, stylish, and politically aggressive. But very few can make all of those impulses live in the same body without one flattening the others. Boots Riley keeps trying to do exactly that, and I Love Boosters sounds like another wild attempt to prove that anti-oligarch satire does not have to feel like medicine to be sharp. It can be ridiculous. It can be euphoric. It can be horny, messy, and gloriously overstuffed. It can be angry without becoming dead-eyed. That matters because too much modern political art mistakes despair for seriousness. Riley clearly does not. That is why this movie seems built around propulsion, not just plot propulsion, emotional propulsion. Cultural propulsion, the sense that if the system is obscene, then the art attacking it should be allowed to be obscene too, not morally, but aesthetically loud, maximal, excessive, funny in a way that keeps the audience moving even while the movie is making a very direct argument about exploitation, labor, class violence, and the absurd logic of capitalism. The setup is pure Riley in the best way. Keke Palmer plays Corvette, an aspiring fashion designer whose talents and self-belief are constantly undercut by a world built to make people like her feel disposable. She moves through the story as part of the Velvet Gang, a joyful crew of professional shoplifters stealing from fast fashion stores and redistributing the goods at discount prices. That premise alone tells you everything about the tone. This is not a grim worker's manifesto. It is a heist comedy with ideology in its bloodstream. The gang is not simply committing crimes. In Riley's world, they are already responding to a crime much larger than themselves, a system that robs workers. Workers' bodies, workers' futures, and then repackages theft as commerce. That is what makes the title work too. I Love Boosters is not just a slogan. It is a thesis, a provocation, a dare to the audience to rethink who gets labeled deviant in a culture built on extraction from top to bottom. And Riley, based on every description coming out of SXSW, seems fully committed to making that dare as entertaining as possible. The Velvet Gang's energy sounds infectious. Corvette, Sade, and Mariah are not framed like broken victims begging for dignity from a cruel economy. They are framed as funny, stylish, often clumsy, extremely specific people who have built a little insurgent ecosystem inside a world that would rather crush them. That choice matters. Too often films about class struggle flatten working people into symbols. Riley appears to be doing the opposite. He gives them velocity, ego, flair, contradiction, and humor. And that is why the movie's politics probably hit harder than they would in a more solemn version, because affection is one of Riley's deadliest tools. The review angle you shared gets right to the heart of it. This film does not seem powered only by disgust at oligarchy. It also seems powered by love for the people forced to live under it. That distinction is important. Rage alone can create a movie that burns hot and then goes numb. Love gives the chaos shape. It lets the audience feel why these characters matter beyond their usefulness as carriers of a message. And if Riley is really pitting Corvette's desire to blow things up against Sade's instinct to gain advantage within the system, then the film is doing something even more interesting than straight satire. It is asking whether destruction and survival can ever truly align under capitalism, or whether one always ends up diluting the other. That is a real tension, and it sounds like the movie never stops worrying at it. The cast helps a lot. Keke Palmer is one of those performers who can turn velocity into structure. She has charisma, comic timing, emotional edge, and just enough unpredictability to make a character feel like she might swerve in any direction without the performance falling apart. Naomi Ackie and Taylor Page alongside her as the Velvet Gang core sounds like a near-perfect trio for a film this fast and stylized. Add Poppy Liu, Isaac Gonzalez, Will Poulter, Demi Moore, Don Cheadle, and Lakeith Stanfield, and suddenly the movie starts looking less like a small satire and more like a pressure cooker. Ensemble designed to bounce big performances off one another at high speed. And it sounds like Riley uses all that energy to keep the film from ever becoming too tidy. That may also be where The film gets messy, but I think that is part of the appeal because Boots Riley was never going to make a surgically precise, elegantly restrained little satire about late capitalism. That would almost be a betrayal of his whole artistic personality. He is a maximalist. He likes ideas colliding at full force. He likes visual jokes, tonal lurches, weird side characters, sudden surrealism, and a structure that sometimes feels one step away from flying apart. That can absolutely weaken a movie if the pieces never start harmonizing. But it can also create the feeling that the film itself is resisting order as a political choice. I Love Boosters sounds like exactly that kind of film. Too much. By design, the more specific details make it even more Riley. Demi Moore reportedly plays Christy Smith, a grotesquely powerful fashion mogul who becomes the target of the gang's rage. Will Poulter is cast as the sort of soft-voiced corporate figure who uses therapeutic language to justify exploitation. That sounds brutally on brand for Riley's worldview. He understands that capitalism no longer always speaks in the language of pure domination. Often it speaks in the language of care, self-improvement, and emotional literacy while quietly stealing from the people under it. That contradiction is fertile comic ground, and Riley seems incapable of looking away from it. Then there is the teleportation-device, which is such a Boots Riley sentence that it almost needs no explanation, and yet it tells you everything. This is not realism wearing satire. This is satire that refuses realism's restrictions when realism becomes too small for the point being made. That impulse was all over Sorry to Bother You, and it seems to be alive here too. If the only way to dramatize the theft and redistribution of fashion goods under grotesque labor conditions is to throw a teleportation device into the middle of the plot, Riley is exactly the type of filmmaker who will do it and dare you to keep up. That is why I think the film's seeming lack of subtlety is more feature than flaw. John Carpenter's They Live is one of the best comparisons for that reason. It is not subtle either. Neither is Sorry to Bother You. Neither, by the sound of it, is I Love Boosters. But subtlety is not automatically virtue, especially when the thing being criticized is already cartoonishly blatant. Riley's art seems to come from a belief that systems this grotesque deserve clarity, ridicule, and maximal exposure, not polite ambiguity. And when the culture of the rich is already this absurd, exaggeration stops feeling like distortion and starts feeling like documentation with better jokes. That is a very useful lane. It also helps that the music comes from Tune Yards, which feels like exactly the right sonic choice for a movie trying to keep agitation and playfulness alive in the same frame. If the score is both enjoyable and discordant, as your review suggests, then that seems perfectly aligned with what the movie wants to do overall. Make resistance feel kinetic instead of dutiful. That is one of the biggest reasons I think I love Boosters may matter, not just because of what it says, because of how it says it. Too many politically charged movies want credit for being right more than they want to be memorable. Riley, by contrast, seems committed to making a movie you can feel in your nerves. Something quotable, outrageous, overripe, and alive. Something where class critique is not hidden, but neither is pleasure. That combination is rare, and when it works, it can be genuinely energizing. So where do I land on I Love Boosters? I think it sounds like a film that may be structurally overstuffed, tonally wild, and occasionally less focused than it should be, but also exactly the kind of movie Boots Riley ought to be making. HT Now, a film that rejects left-wing fatalism, a film that mocks the ruling class without turning the oppressed into saints or symbols, a film that believes joy, lust, humor, and absurdity are not distractions from political struggle, but part of how people endure it. That is a much harder movie to make than a sermon. And a much more exciting one too. Watch. So now I want to know what you think. Does I Love Boosters sound like Boots Riley doubling down on the exact kind of chaos that makes him great? Or does the film's apparent messiness make you think it may be reaching beyond what it can actually hold together? And more importantly, is the movie's real power in its anti-capitalist satire, or in the way it seems to love the people fighting back inside that satire? That is the real charge. And May 22nd is getting closer.